Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Jonathan Lacoste. Jonathan is a general partner at SPACE.VC, a venture capital fund investing in stage tech startups. Previously, Jonathan was the founder of an enterprise software company that raised $90 million plus over the course of a decade and sold in 2021. Jonathan, welcome to the Future of Space.
Thanks so much for having me, Daniel. Great to be here.
Now, Jonathan, before we go into the company that you have right now and your journey from the days of software to now, can you share with us three words that describe, that capture the essence of space for you?
Great question. I'd say necessary, limitless, and deeply misunderstood as my third.
Deeply misunderstood. We'll talk about deeply misunderstood because I think it's part of the why you and I were having this conversation right now. We're trying to really find that story that unites everyone rather than divides us all. But so part of that, what do you think is the human story of going to space?
The human story of space is not unlike other seminal moments throughout the history of mankind when a new frontier emerges, technology enables exploration, or the potential to explore a new frontier pushes technical innovation beyond what is thought to be possible. And, mankind and womankind, we always seem to um, explore and find out more about ourselves, about our origin, and make new discoveries that make life here on Earth better. And so, certainly while the origin of space may have been geopolitical in nature back in the 1960s, I think what's really exciting about the future of exploration of space is that it really is about pushing the limits of our current understanding on the physical world around us, about climate, about scientific discoveries that are only possible in zero gravity in space, about exploring, the moon and bodies near us, and potentially putting a permanent base on Mars and other planets. And so, certainly the future of space is one where human and technological exploration is increasing in frequency and in daily life versus becoming more rare.
I think that from the perspective of life, it's always been looking for that moment of going beyond the planet. I mean, if you think of the journey of the single cell to where we are today, it's been constantly pushing and wanting to connect and expand. This is what really life does. It doesn't want the status quo. It doesn't want to stay in one place. And now we're about to go from single planet to multiplanetary in the same way that it went from single cell to multi-cell. And it will elevate, it will create, obviously, I mean, we'll have new challenges, but it will elevate the human story, the human experience to new places and all. I mean, there's definitely science benefits and technology benefits, but just for the consciousness and for the awareness of what it is to be human, it will be, I mean, it will just bring us this cognitive shift of quantum leap. Would you agree?
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I think especially that like cognitive approach and just like the intellectual understanding of ourselves as a species, but also being able to test new pharmaceutical drugs and understanding kind of new therapeutic approaches. Like there's a lot that space can offer us here on Earth too. I think for the Western world, the two other moments in history that says a lot about the moment we're in right now is certainly the era of European expansion and exploration of the New World of the Americas, and also a little bit later on the westward expansion, the gold rush, the eminent domain, kind of push towards coast to coast. That those moments in time, if you go back and look at the newspaper clippings, and not that I have readily available, clippings from the 1800s and 1600s, but in looking online through Google and kind of hearing and reading the research and history of that, there were some folks that thought those folks that were going west or sailing and for the pure sake of exploration were a little crazy. And it needs those individuals that kind of risk it all to really push forward the history of mankind. And so, in many regards, I view space in a similar light today. as it relates to becoming a multiplanetary species, space tourism, and any space based travel.
I wrote this piece about how back in the 1900s there was this time where Edison, Tesla, and the Wright brothers were all in the same kind of era, and granted there was tremendous amount of challenges and issues in the world. There were diseases everywhere, but they didn't choose to become doctors. They tried to create a world that a lot of people would have said, like, what are you doing trying to take the sky or power the world when there are people dying of so many other things? But the world that they created by powering the world and by going to the sky actually took care of a lot of the issues that, and it's not just this one way to approach a problem. It's it's a multi approach, and it's not just a single, but it's a multi approach, and where, like, yes, we still have a purpose for arts, we still have a purpose for philosophies, we still have a purpose for a lot of things that do not seem to be so directly addressed to the issue, but they it's a it's the strategy that they put together is actually one that elevates and will take care of those problems, and that's what space is going to be doing, right?
Absolutely. And I'm inspired every day working on the forefront with founders and management teams and early stage companies trying to build that future. And obviously, what is so exciting about space as a category, for many folks that aren't familiar with it, space is truly, I think you would agree, not a single category or vertical or industry. It's dozens of different industries that just happen to coalesce around the shared location in space, or leveraging space based assets or data. And so there's all types of exciting development being done to improve billions of people's lives here on Earth every day. Billions of people currently use space-based technologies they may not be aware of. But what's exciting is that individuals that work in space are all interconnected, I found, by this larger mission, this larger being or purpose of helping us have the optionality to explore and become multiplanetary. I totally understand the perspective of the average person who doesn't think about space, who is confused about why we're going to Mars, and may not find that to be their personal passion. But what I think they would come to appreciate is that space can make their lives a lot better. It can help us address the climate crisis. And if by doing so, we have frequent, reusable, democratized access to space for folks that want to explore, and that by going, we explore the outer space and help us better understand life here on Earth, I think you'd get a lot of the people that would be agreeable to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And if we go back to the European expansion, in the 1500s, uh, the same, you would have the same critique on why would people risk their entire lives getting on the boat and going to a foreign land and having to start from the beginning. And I think also we have to take a moment to think of what does it take for someone to do that, like to leave everything behind, to get on the boat where your chances of survival are not really that great, and it's a month long journey of some of the worst conditions, and then you get to this new land, to North America, and now you still have to get into a caravan and you have to cross the continent on the promise of something better. What are the incentive? What is the motivation for someone to drop everything and to do that? And obviously, it's because Europe had reached its capacity. When it did happen, Europe was a pretty much shamble. I mean, all the resources had been kind of depleted. Hygiene conditions were not really good, and this discovery of a new frontier allowed Europe to fix its problems, but also it gives also the incentive for people to go and start a new life. And going to space, I mean, obviously, we're not talking about the next 5 years, but in the next 100 years and 200 years, this is what is going to happen. Where you just going, it's not at the expense of the other, but it's both of them are elevating themselves, because it's a relationship. Like when you leave your house, you're 18 years old. Your parents have brought you up. When you leave the house, you're not leaving well, depending on the families. But when you leave the house, it's not never to say, at the expense of your parents. It's actually what you're going to be doing will also support your parents back home. And having many children or having this extended family actually just increases the value of your life and your story, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I would hone in on two elements of this. One is this like zeroism idea or concept that is pervading the narrative that I just don't think is true. You know, there's plenty of resources to go around for us to explore space and to support the important technological and human advancements and developments that come as a part of that, and to make life better here on Earth. And so, you know, I really struggle with that zeroism argument, the narrative that's made sometimes. To your point, it's not one versus the other. I certainly take an abundance mindset, and I think there's plenty that we can do to support both, you know, life here on Earth and beyond.
I mean, just in terms of resources, like I wrote about the fact that you have a house and I have a house and we have a backyard, and we're able to kind of beautify and manicure our environment is because everything that we need to live, we actually import it. Like, and everything that we create is actually exported. So I don't need a sewage system in my backyard. I don't. I mean, some people have a garden, but I don't have a garden. I don't have a power, manufactured in the backyard because all these things come from elsewhere. So, and it gives me the freedom to kind of put little trees around and plants like that. And it's going to be the same thing with the planet. The minute that we can start mining in places that are desolate or more remote and relieve the planet from the extraction of resources, we're going to be in a position. I mean, granted, it's not going to be like it's not going to turn the planet into like a piece of heaven, but it will definitely lessen the pressure of extraction because now you're getting it from other places that or it's not the center of the Amazon, correct?
Yeah, and I think this actually harkens back to something I was going to refer to earlier, which is this idea of like incrementalism versus an exponential moonshot. And I think whether you're building a company or whether society's progressing over centuries, we as a species, we always need both to work in parallel. We need incremental improvements too. If you're talking about mining or sewage systems or power grid, we need improvements on a daily basis that individuals, communities can feel, they can see tangible action on. But you also need exponential moonshots. You need people to go, companies to go, try something completely radically different, risk it all. And I think we have to accept that the success rate of that, by definition, is going to be very challenged. It's going to be minimal compared to an incremental approach. But whether it was the Wright brothers deciding to go to Kitty Hawk Beach and try to fly, whether it was Henry Ford trying to build the Model T, whether it's the space pioneers of today trying to go build a permanent base on the moon and Mars, we may not fully understand what the future of that is or the potential of that is. But I think we should recognize that it is important to try. It is important to do, and it is important to have those, no pun intended, moonshots across many technological surface areas.
Absolutely. We need it's just for the even for the younger generation, just to have even to ourselves to understand or to have a peek into something that is so beyond what we can understand. And because when you do reach those boundaries and then they become a reality, it reminds us of our capacity to keep moving and to keep elevating. Because otherwise, it would be too easy to kind of be gloom and doom about like never reaching that ceiling or never like getting anywhere. You just feel like you're too heavy. So we need those impossible milestones so that when we cross them, we're like, oh my god, to the next one. Now, Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit of the background of right now? You have your um, the SPACE.VC, the venture capitalist. You started in the technology business, and as a teenager, was space always there for you, or it was an incremental attraction, or was it something from the beginning?
I definitely have a journey of adult intellectual curiosity and interest towards space, I would say. I grew up in the Midwest in Ohio. Um, Space was interesting to me. I interacted with it with a little bit, but I was not. Um, obsessed or particularly curious about it my entire childhood. And I don't say that as a negative for those that are. But what I think is really important is that in order for space to be successful, we need to attract as an industry folks at any point in their journey, any point in their career, to come and help build successful companies, to help on this great expansion upwards and outwards. And so for me, my journey was I went to university in the Boston area. After 3 semesters, I dropped out with a few classmates. We'd raised a couple $100,000 for this business plan competition around, an enterprise software company that was specifically focused on consumer data. It was a data tech company. And to make a very long story short, over the next 10 years, I had a firsthand experience in world-class education on the highs and lows and the difficulties of scaling a software company. And it ended with a very positive note. We raised, as you mentioned, over $90 million in venture. We sold the company a majority stake last year for well into 9 figures, and it was a really positive outcome for everyone. But as a part of that, I have deep, deep empathy for founders and for CEOs and what it takes to build. There were several times our business almost ran out of cash. There were multiple traumatic deaths along the way that really, still to this day personally impacted us. And so I think the reality of that decade-long experience, when I took a step back and decided, where do I want to spend my time? I realized the biggest thing that I was searching for in life was impact. And I wanted to go into an industry and work in a community where I felt like if I could partner with the smartest entrepreneurs and builders that were building companies today, would those companies have a multi-generational impact? And I loved what I was doing in enterprise tech and data tech, but impact felt a little bit too indirect for me. And so coming into space, launching a space venture capital firm, that's what I do. That's why we do what we do today. Because I love working with entrepreneurs. I love working with founders and helping them grow. But most importantly, if they're successful, I think it can make life here on Earth and beyond better for all of us. And that's something that's really motivating every day.
Now, we were talking earlier about how space is not just going to be rockets and fuel and mobility. It's really going to be everything that makes our lives today, but just into this new place. So whether it's architecture, apparel, wellness, health, biotech, mobility, energy, everything. So your company focuses on what area in particular?
Given my background as kind of a software SaaS guru, we love data and software oriented businesses. Now, what's beautiful about space is you do have some businesses that are purely software oriented. They may be doing something with Earth observation based data. They may be, a software business that helps improve the internal operations of these larger space companies. They may be software companies that help non-space companies interact with the space ecosystem. But obviously, space is, a lot of hardware businesses and infrastructure. And so what we really look for are core infrastructure and climate-oriented hardware companies that are part of the space ecosystem. And one of the things I've been so excited about as I've become more introduced into the space ecosystem over the past 2 years is just how much cheaper and more affordable and approachable it is to build a space company today than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago. And the reason that's important is because it enables new types of satellite constellations to be built in a way more cost-effective manner that attract folks like myself, venture capitalists, to support and invest in those companies. Those companies then develop services that are highly profitable, whether they're in telecommunications connectivity, whether they're in weather or GPS, whether they're in climate. And so those are all businesses that we get really excited about, that we've invested in and that we're going to continue to invest in moving forward.
Are there a couple of companies that you're in that you can share with us that get you all excited?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a backlog of, I think, 4 or 5 deals, investments that we've done that aren't public yet. So I'll speak to your point too. We have 10 or 11 companies that we've invested in publicly so far. So I'll start with the most noteworthy one, SpaceX. SpaceX has the best brand recognition within and outside the space community. The reason I think SpaceX is so important, if it isn't obvious, is in order for the entire space ecosystem to thrive, we need frequent, democratized, and cheap access to space. And we need it in a variety of capacities. We need that type of access for humans. We need it certainly for infrastructure, and we need it for certain orbits and inclinations we're trying to get to. And what SpaceX has done candidly has built the platform for the entire commercial space ecosystem in the recent decade to exist based on the relentless pursuit that that company and Elon have had towards making, through their Falcon 9 and now hopefully through Starship and kind of the next generation, cheap and affordable access to space. We are also extremely bullish on Starlink, as evidenced maybe most recently by the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as the most reliable and cost-effective manner moving forward to bring populations in rural areas or in emerging markets online and to become connected with the 21st century economy. And so, there are really interesting studies that show what happens when emerging markets get connected to high-speed internet. And in certain communities, broadband and laying fiber optic cables is going to make sense. In other instances, that doesn't make sense at all. And so leading internet connectivity companies like Starlink as part of SpaceX, we're really excited about. But that's obvious. Maybe ones that are less familiar, but I'm equally excited about. We have a core thesis at the fund, which is that many companies will want to interface with space, but they will want to outsource space because space is complex. Let's be honest, right? Whether it's the supply chain logistics of building a satellite company or constellation, just the launch process within itself, managing a spacecraft in space, that's very complex. But there are benefits that can be realized for unlocking that for a regular agriculture company or financial services. And so we have this vision and thesis around outsourcing space. And one of our companies, Loft Orbital, is basically providing hosted payload Uber rideshare for space type services. And so if you're a non-space company, but you want to collect space-based data maybe, or you want to have some type of experiment in space, you can outsource all of that development to Loft Orbital. They have a series of hardware and software innovations that basically allow you to leverage their, again, Uber rideshare model, because they can put 3 or 4 different companies and sensors and instruments on the same satellite bus. And then they manage that process for you. They go to launch and manage it in space. And that's really key for us as we think about how do we unlock space for the enterprise and companies in a way where they can experience it much more simply. And then maybe the last one I would mention, and I think your users might be excited about, is this idea of in-space manufacturing. We invested in a company called SpaceForge. They're based in the United Kingdom. They recently announced the largest seed round a European space company has ever raised, 7 million. And what's exciting about them and in-space manufacturing in general, as you probably know, in-space manufacturing has been proven through a variety of scientific experiments for decades, going back all the way to the origins of the ISS. But what is now possible is because the cost of launch, because the cost of off-the-shelf satellite components is so much more affordable, it has opened up the commercial opportunity to do this at scale, not with a single astronaut spending a small fraction of their day doing something for an academic or scientific research project, but what are valuable materials that we can make in space that actually have benefit and can only be made in space based on zero gravity versus things that we can try to create on Earth. And so SpaceForge is approaching that from a semiconductor wafer standpoint. I think we all know if we're going to, as a part of the climate change shift, if we're going to invest in EVs, electric vehicles, and the electrification of the world, the semiconductor crunch we're already experiencing. And so SpaceForge has a really novel, important approach to developing some of those aspects of the semiconductor supply chain in space and then bringing that back to Earth for terrestrial use. So hopefully through those 3 examples, you can kind of see, we're looking at the full space ecosystem from launch to infrastructure and certainly thinking about climate and terrestrial industries back here on Earth.
You were talking about SpaceX at the beginning, and I think that SpaceX was really like a turning point for many, many people that changed their relationship with space when they saw those reusable rockets. I mean, landing back, it is still something so counterintuitive to see a rocket landing back. I think it's, for, I mean, myself included, it's almost one of the most exciting moments every time that we watch a launch to see the rocket coming back and just landing, and it just blows your mind. And what SpaceX has been able to do is really tip the reality of a relationship with space. I mean, I think, Steve Jobs was able to do that with the Mac when he, in 1998 created this public commercial connection with technology that, so before that was just mainly like a niche market, but then Apple made it a more approachable, and everybody could relate to that. And the same thing is happening right now with space. And we do have to give it to Elon Musk, to creating that vision and just to risking everything. And we make jokes about these testings, these rockets exploding, but the commitment, the financial commitment to go through that demands a particular type of personality that you don't see often. And a lot of that success is also, I think, luck to have. If Elon Musk hadn't, was born 20 years before, or maybe was not the first child in his family, but the second child, or had stayed in Canada as opposed to leaving Canada and going to Stanford, that nexus, that critical point of all these elements coming together would have not happened, and then we would not be here, you and I, talking. But it happened, and now the cost of payload is tremendously going down. And I did see the video of Space Forge, this idea of like manufacturing this entire, like melting the metals in this structure. It is just so fascinating to see all these new ideas moving forward. And I think there's not a day that goes by that I don't have this like almost youthful excitement of just hearing people coming up with ideas and seeing the ways that we can elevate our lives and the technologies of both on Earth, but like using the space as this blank canvas is like, imagine we could do this and we could do that. I mean, from your end, I think that like every day you must be receiving emails to just go like, wow.
Yes, I'm constantly inspired both by the level of innovation and also the dedication of entrepreneurs in the space ecosystem. It is honestly one of the reasons I get up in the morning. Like, I think I was joking with you pre-recording, like I got COVID yesterday and I'm not feeling great today, but why am I up and having a regular set of meetings and working hard? Because I'm inspired by the entrepreneurs that I work with, and I know they're up and at it. And we are each only blessed with so much time on this earth, and so we need to make the most of it and leave an impact. I think one of the things that, going back to what you were saying, in terms of like that reusable rocket landing and those videos, like those are such iconic moments, and I think that's something that begins to inspire audiences and individuals outside of space about the potential promise and future of space. But I still think as an industry, we need to do a better job of connecting the dots for them, because you and I and others that spend all day in the space ecosystem, it is obvious why we should be excited about that. Okay, if they can nail fully reusable stage 1 and 2, which obviously is the promise of Starship rocketry. Okay, well that does this to the cost of launch. Well, if the launch cost goes down, well, these types of business models are now viable. And wow, maybe we can create a next generation of GPS, whether maybe we can have even better weather tracking for individuals on a daily basis. Maybe every individual, all 7 billion people here on Earth, can be connected to high-speed 5G internet at any time, no matter where they are. Maybe plain Wi-Fi finally won't suck. Like whatever your passion is, whatever your gripe is, there's a great thread that goes back to space technology. And so that at the end of the day is what really motivates me, is that I see a future where space is not siloed, is increasingly integrated into our everyday lives, whether it's consumer applications, climate, again, enterprise infrastructure, connectivity, exploration. And in the next 10 years, we will see a permanent settlement on the moon. We'll see NASA return to the moon, and we will see efforts by the Chinese and by SpaceX to go to Mars. And I think it'll be a sad thing if you're not rooting for that as part of the history of humanity. I'd love to be on the side of history that, whether it's successful or not on their first attempt, I'm certainly there rooting for them and giving it everything I have for them to be successful as well. So
I think that anyone who has moved away from where they were born, using the internet and buying products that were manufactured not in their backyard, everybody can, I mean, at one point, can understand what we're trying to communicate with space, because we're we're going to replicate exactly what everybody's been doing ever since the beginning. It's just that now it's in the context of outer space. We're going into a different planet. I mean, outside of the planet. So it's hard for people to grasp the scale of it. But we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just looking at the opportunity to expand and to bring and to elevate everyone at the same time. And that, I think, that's why I always ask people, what is the human story of going to space? Because the human story is what we've been. I mean, this is what the human species has been kind of expert at, is going above the limitation that nature or life has given us. We're born in one village, but then we move. I mean, we can look into our evolution, and back in the days that we were nomadic, we were at the mercy of the change around us. We had to move with the weather, we had to move with the food, we had to build a shelter and then destroy that shelter and then move forward. And then at one point we became sedentary, and then we started to build on the what I call the chaos of nature, because nature is quite of a chaotic environment. It doesn't really matter who wins and who loses. It just throws a bunch of things out there to see what works and what doesn't work. And whether a volcano erupts, well, it erupts and then it blankets, it kills everything in the process. But for us, the human species, we've been able to take that chaos, create a certain level of stability, and then we can build on that. So if we're limited by one thing, then we figure out a way to go beyond that. If we're limited with the food, we're gonna have to figure out something. If we're limited by a geography, then we figure a way to go beyond that geography. So if something happens with that place, then we have these other different solutions. And to Elon's point, the dinosaurs were destroyed by this giant piece of rock, and that's going to come down. Great, we're talking billions of years in the future, or maybe the planet will come to an end in billions of years. But this capacity to spread ourselves into new places. So if something does happen, then we're diversified. I mean, it's the same thing for like a stuck portfolio. You want to diversify yourself, so if something does happen, then you have other outlets, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that's what, as an ecosystem, we need to continue to preach and share and get feedback on with broader audiences. I'm 100% of the belief that if there's a 1% chance of some type of external or massive climate oriented catastrophe that could risk all life here on Earth, then absolutely we should be exploring becoming a multiplanetary species. And by the way, us exploring that does not require all individuals here on Earth to be a part of that conquest. Generally, of the 7 billion people, if a couple 100,000 people dedicate their professional careers to building a space ecosystem and building the technology and the supply chain, and the first few hundred individuals that go to Mars are essentially risking their lives. I think we both would agree that that is not a guaranteed two-way mission. That is heroic, and that is noble on behalf of humanity. That is in some ways philanthropic. That's the ultimate act of service. However, it doesn't necessitate that all people in the moment will kind of understand that, right? Just like harkening back to your European example, I'm sure there were folks that in the 1600s and 1500s were questioning why the monarchs were spending so much of their capital sponsoring these patrons and these adventurers to go westward and explore, and similarly, neighbors and friends and family members questioning why an individual was risking it all and moving west as part of the Great Westward expansion in the United States. Similarly, there will be folks that don't understand or don't have the full context of that promise. But I hope it doesn't dissuade anyone that's pursuing that, because I think it is potentially one of the highest acts of service for humanity that someone could do.
I think a lot of people talk about billionaires, and the reality is that billionaires have always been part of the equation, but they had a different name attached to them. You just said the monarchs, yes, the kings and queens before were the billionaires who had the capacity to fund endeavors that would be way too risky for for any other normal organizations, until at one point the commercialization or the scale of it allows private individual, private companies to do so. But it's always been part of the equation. Just now, you have the form of it is a little bit different, but the actors are still the same. And it's always important. I tell a lot of
Mm-hmm.
to people about how, like, we talk about the Renaissance, how all these artists, and technologies came out of the Renaissance. Why? Because you had this moment of vision combined with people who had the money and the power. You had the Medici people who had understood the power of creating a vision with the money that they had, and they went and hired artists, all kinds of people to really elevate this vision of the future, and which today we would not be here had it not been for this movement. And it's going to be the same. The rich people, the billionaires of our society, it is not their job to communicate the experience. Their purpose in the equation is to create an opportunity so that other people who are really good at expressing or communicating, or using that opportunity to create something else, and where to tell the story. That is where all these pieces of the puzzle fit together. And it's the same, you know, you have an entrepreneur background, the world would be an absolute chaos if everybody was an entrepreneur. It would, I mean, nothing would work if everybody was suddenly an entrepreneur. You need these entrepreneurs, but these entrepreneurs also need other skills around them, so that, and that's really what is a successful entrepreneur, is someone who is able to surround himself or herself with other people that can compensate or can complement the vision that they have. And often the ones that do not succeed is not because their ideas was less good, it's just unfortunately they were not able to put those people around them that can create that team. So I mean, it's, moving to space. It's, we need all these stories, all these actors, so that we can go. It's not just, it's obviously it's not just a billionaire narrative, but it's all these little actors. Whether, like, I was talking to Patty Stoll the other day from LLC Dover, she was saying it's like how much they're hiring a lot of people right now. And I said, so, okay, I understand that you're hiring engineer for the space suit, but if someone from the fashion school is listening to it right now and they want to be involved in space, are you hiring people with no engineering skills but having this fashion, vision? She said, absolutely. This is actually what we need right now. We need to go beyond just the engineering mindset, but more about the human mindset, the human experience, the human element, so that it can become more inclusive and not just this kind of tech area. Would you agree on that?
Totally. I mean, my journey of coming from outside the space ecosystem and contributing and being hopefully a helpful participant cannot be a unique or the only story. We need as many talent inflows as possible of entrepreneurs, engineers, sales folks, marketing professionals, anyone with a relevant skill set. We will, like most movements and industries, we will be limited by the amount of talented and intellectual people we have dedicating themselves towards the vision of space. So I totally agree with that, and I think we're making good strides. I do think an obstacle, a challenge that you mentioned, is this narrative of space equating to, the billionaire space race and space tourism being kind of like the only objective. And I think one thing I'm really passionate about recently, and it's why when we talked at the beginning of the podcast about space, I said deeply misunderstood, is because I think for, again, the average person who doesn't interface or think about space nearly as much, I think it's maybe not as obvious to them always, because we haven't, educated and spent the time to walk them through it, that the reason that Elon and Jeff and others spending billions of their own personal fortunes and raising a lot of capital to build reusable rockets, and why wealthy patrons going on space tourism, flights short term, is a great thing. It is subsidizing the development of technology that continues to become more democratized and continues to help us all. And I think the fact that maybe folks aren't feeling that net benefit immediately is what's pointing to the challenge, or certainly there's a societal and way larger conversation than we can have on this podcast about wealth generation and income gaps, and like what is too little and what is too much wealth for one to have. And I think that is certainly driving this a lot as well. But I would really challenge people to think about, I want to live in a world where, regardless of what the number is, I don't care what the number is of how wealthy someone is, I would rather them spend their time, effort, and intellectual capacity trying to make humanity or life here on Earth better, however one might define it, than by self consumption of buying more yachts, buying more houses, whatever it is that they would be spending their personal capital on. And so, while he certainly has a lot of colorful tweets, and while certainly there are folks that can't relate, to Jeff or to Richard, um, I'm very thankful for anyone, regardless of their financial status, for spending their hard earned resources in making space possible. Um, but I do think it is incumbent on the next generation of entrepreneurs that are building the space economy today. They'll be the ones that truly define and connect it to the average American or average household in the world, that might begin to shift hearts and minds about this idea of why space is so important and what the future of space holds.
Absolutely agree, Jonathan. In fact, there was a moment where the momentum was really about the negative aspect of the billionaire narrative, and then Inspiration 4 happened, and William Shatner happened. Inspiration 4 for me was everything. It was a gem in its execution, in the narrative. It was the best. Here is this billionaire creating this opportunity for people who would never think that the opportunity was possible. But not only that, but uses this moment to raise money for St. Jude Hospital. But even the way that he selected those seats represented a vision of where we want to go. So Inspiration 4 happens, changes really this idea of like, well, the billionaires are just, doing it for themselves. And then William Shatner finally, this person who's been trained to really capture the essence of an experience, that's what actors are. They have to take an emotion and they have to really, soak it in. And he goes up and he comes down, and there's not one person that watches this moment and doesn't really connect with what he's going through. And it's interesting because you read the scene, and Jeff is right next to him, and he's trying to like get him to be with the other people, but he's like, so like William Shatner is in this place where his entire life has been changed. And the physicality of that experience of seeing the Earth with the context of space, there's no substitute for that. There's a physicality to life that cannot be replicated unless you do it, and then it changes everything. When Sir Edmund Hillary went up to the top of Everest and came back and devoted his life to Sherpas, and because what he experienced was just so life changing that it changed everything in his life. And there's not one person that I talked to that went up to space and comes back not changed. They all come back, and now they have a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility and a sense of optimism about the opportunity that was given to them, but what they can do and where we can achieve. And that is the story that we have to keep telling each other, not each other because we all get it, but that we have to keep telling to the world so that they can understand this vision. And they don't need to get on board. They just need to understand the value of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think over time that message will become hopefully more apparent as more people are able to travel, whether suborbitally or on a full 10-day orbital mission, like the Axiom space mission that just splashed down as we're recording this morning, or last night here, as part of that mission. Yeah, it's truly inspiring. It's truly inspiring, and it's kind of crazy that we have people traveling to space, average citizens, not astronauts, and it's kind of part of the news cycle now. It's not like this monumental event that everyone sits in front of their TV and is glued to. Like, it's exciting, but and I think that speaks to the progress we're making. Actually, I think how normal that is becoming speaks to the idea that again, hopefully space does become democratized. It's not just to those with wealthy resources. I know there are a lot of great foundations that are obviously working hard to make sure that space is diverse. The individuals going to space are diverse, and they're not just white and not just male oriented. Early on, and certainly making sure that it's not just people of means. So I'm very excited. I know there are lots of thoughts and timelines and approaches to when and how humans will go and continue exploring space. But I think it's only for our general net benefit here on Earth.
Now, Jonathan, if people want to learn more about your company, or if someone has a startup and they're looking for advice or funding, where can they go? What's the website and the different social media platform that you're present?
Yeah, I'm most active on Twitter. That's where a lot of founders reach out, is either Twitter or LinkedIn. So if you want to go to LinkedIn, just search Jonathan Lacoste. It'll pop up. And if you want to go to Twitter, it's Lacoste Jonathan. At is my handle. And yeah, we're happy to chat with you, and we'll write about another 10 to 12 investments this year into space tech companies. So if you're building something interesting or interested in learning more about what we're up to, please reach out. It's SPACE.VC.co.co.
Well, we'll make sure that all the links are in the description. Jonathan, I just heard you pronounce your last name. I pronounced your last name with the French accent at the beginning. So my apologies.
No, I have
But
family origin that's French. So when I'm with them, it certainly is Jonathan Lacoste. But for an English audience, it is Lacoste,
like
classic alligator shirt. So.
Jonathan, thank you so very much. I look forward for a path to cross. And until then, good luck with recovering from COVID, and wishing all the best to you and your family.
Thanks so much for having me on, Daniel. It was a pleasure.